First of all, I want to remind your audience that I am a follower of Jesus. And so everything I share will have that bent to it. It will all be biblically based. And so I want everyone to understand where I'm coming from with that. And I may quote scripture. I don't know how God will work that out. But I do welcome your thoughts, your questions. And so just type it in the chat and we'll continue to answer those as well as the ones that Dr. Janice and I have talked about discussing.
Wonderful. And just a little note about Corinne. Corinne is a life coach, and she helps persons to identify the erroneous beliefs and the thoughts and the judgments that they hold on to. And she helps them to overcome these and to achieve their goals and their dreams. They call her the stinking thinker. And she did explain to us the last time why she's known as the stinking thinker. And so, Miss Corinne, thank you so much again for coming. We're going to get right into this because I really want us to talk a little bit about this forgiveness matter. And the first question is always going to be, how do you define, or how would you define forgiveness?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to repeat the question. Yes.
I think forgiveness is God's way to help us experience freedom and joy and breakthrough. Now, is it an easy way? No, but he also tells us that wide is the path to destruction, but narrow is the path to life. And so I think forgiveness is one of those narrow paths that definitely brings us life.
Forgiveness is one of those paths that brings us life. And that is so true, because we can hinge that onto the great verse, God so loved. Thank you so much for that. And Corinne, you know, many times we think about forgiveness and we hear people say, you know, don't think I can forgive because of what he has done to me or what she has done to me. How would you respond to hearing someone say that? Or what would you say to that person?
Well, my answer to that is God gave us free will, which means that I have a choice. I can choose to forgive or I can choose not to forgive. But by the same token, okay, God also gave me a command. He told me that if I want to forgive, I need to forgive. And so I have a choice. Do I want to be forgiven? If so, then his response is forgive as I have forgiven you.
Wow. His response is forgive as I have forgiven you. So in other words, Corinne, you're saying that this comes down to a personal decision. Because
exactly.
Wow.
So we don't have to, but we can choose to.
And it doesn't mean that the other person can force me to forgive, because this is a personal decision. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. I see several persons came into the room since we first started. We're talking with Corinne Keith, and we're sharing on this topic, the power of forgiveness. This is not one of the usual topics that we would share on, but this is a topic that is well needed, because every single one of us at some point in our lives have struggled with forgiveness in one way or the other, whether we want to admit it or not. Because forgiveness sometimes, or unforgiveness sometimes, is not something that is put up on a placard in the air. It's something that is held in the depth of our hearts, and it causes so many things to happen to us. And as we go on, Corinne will tell us some of the things that are caused by forgiveness and unforgiveness. So Corinne, we talked about persons saying, I don't think I can forgive, and it comes down to a personal decision. And if we can take that a little further, we can think of also persons who would say, you don't understand how much that hurt me, or you don't understand how much you hurt me. Why should I forgive? Talk to that other person again.
Well, I go back to my example, which is Jesus. Okay. And there will be some arguments in terms of Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. In the midst of being on the cross, totally crucified, whipped, nailed, everything, he still chose to extend forgiveness, including the thief, the one thief that asked for forgiveness on the cross, when he said, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And so we may think that we understand that somebody intentionally hurt us or wounded us, but God says he only knows the thoughts and intents of the heart. So we don't necessarily know what's going on within people, even though we like to think we might.
So there is no way for us to tell, because it's something from the heart. You know, I hear someone say, Corinne, that forgiveness is an active act. Forgiveness is an active act. And when I think about that, I wonder if there is a difference between forgiving from your head and forgiving from your heart. What would you say?
I would say there's a gargantuan difference, Dr. Janice, because we tend, and the church has often taught, to extend forgiveness. And we say, okay, well, I let them go. I'm not going to hold it against them, whatever, but we forgive from here, from our heads. And we forget that there's an emotional part of us, and that emotional part gets wounded too. And we have to acknowledge the hurt, the pain, the judgments that came as a result, because it makes us feel when an offense occurs, it touches our emotional core. And so we have to touch that fact if we're going to forgive. Otherwise, our forgiveness is incomplete. We are a whole person, body, soul, and spirit. And so it has to touch that part of us, because yes, the spirit part forgives, okay, but the soul part, which is the mind, will, and emotions, needs to touch that pain as well. And so usually if I'm dealing with people and helping them to forgive, I had them say, I choose to forgive you for, name the specific, even though it made me feel rejected, lonely, like garbage, whatever. Okay. When we address how we felt in our heart, we're releasing them from that responsibility. And we acknowledge that that hurt.
I want you to talk to us about that a little bit again, because you said when we speak from our heart, our soul, which is a will, emotion, and desire, it reaches the person in more effective ways.
Right.
That's what you're saying. But when
Correct.
we do it from just our head,
it's incomplete. Basically it's like running a car on 3 wheels. It doesn't get to its final destination in that way. And so the heart portion is acknowledging the depth of the pain and the wholeness of the whole person. Does that make sense?
it makes sense, and that's really deep. That is really deep.
All right, let
Forgiveness.
me give you a classic example. Okay, I think I shared on this last time a little bit. Okay, my dad had molested me. Okay, and so I had to forgive the act that was performed, but it also impacted my soul realm. It made me feel crummy about myself. It made me feel guilt. I had shame. I had to acknowledge all of those ramifications that came with that one act. And I still had to choose to forgive him because I experienced that kind of depth of pain.
And that means that you had to find this in your heart. It's not just thinking about it from here. You had to go deep and find that in your heart to forgive.
And what did I really need to forgive? Because even though the experience can be the same for people, the depth of the emotions are totally different. So it's not going to be the same for everybody. Even though they may have experienced the same rejection, pain, whatever, okay, hurt, offense, whatever you want to call it. The bottom line is that their emotions are unique to them. So they're the ones that have to dig deep to get to what those are for them.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. Ladies and gentlemen, we do use up the chat when we're in this room. And so if you have comments or questions, you go ahead and drop them in the chat. We also keep the last 15 minutes of the program where we open the floor so that you can ask questions or make your comments to the guest that you were not able to ask during the program. But Corinne, one of the things I am thinking about while you're talking there is the forgetting part of it. And I'm going back to the head, the forgetting part of things, because sometimes you wonder, is forgetting something necessary for forgiveness? Do I have to forget what you did to me in order to forgive you, or should I forget it after I forgive you? Because sometimes we say, well, you must just forget it and forgive and move along. Does forgetting seals it then, the deal of forgiveness?
Okay, well, first of all, forgetting is not the means to forgiveness. Forgetting can be a result of choosing to forgive, but it will never get you to forgiveness. Okay, let me give you a classic example as to how you can tell whether or not what forgiveness has to, or what forgetting has to do with forgiveness. All right, when I was a child, all right, I had an accident and I ran into a bicycle and I cut my chin. Okay, well, a face wound bleeds forever, right? And so I never had stitches. So I have a scar. That means that, did I forget that? No. I still remember the incident, but is there any pain with this scar? No, there isn't. And so that's how I look at forgiveness. You have the memory of it, but not the pain that's associated with it.
There's power in that. You have the memory of it, but there's no pain associated with it. And that's where the forgiveness is real.
Mm-hmm.
The
So it's
memory is
not
there.
forgetting it. I remember that accident. I remember the bleeding, but there's no pain when I think about that memory. And I think that's what happens when true forgiveness occurs. Yes, you have the memory of it, but it doesn't have the same sting or the same pain.
Forgiveness takes away the pain. Thank you so much for that dropping in the chat there. So Corinne, this is a deep one. Is forgiveness between me and God, or is it between me and the offender?
I'm going to answer both and both. First of all, it's between you and God, because God commands us to forgive. It really isn't a choice or an option. There are many times where God says, forgive. It's a command. Okay. Is it between you and the offender? Not to the point where you may confront them one-on-one. God may ask you to do that, but he may not. It's only between you and the offender in that you let go. You get them off of your hook. Okay. In other words, we hold on to resentment and bitterness and anger and all that other stuff. Okay. Now, does the other person feel that? No, not normally. They don't. They don't experience they may react to your hatred or your resentment. Okay. But they may not know why. So it isn't necessarily between you and them per se, but that forgiveness will break down the hook that we have, that we want justice. And so from that part of it, it's letting go of our sense of justice, because we can't give that kind of justice. Only God can do that.
You're right, because there is a thought that says unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So when you hold on to the unforgiveness, you are the one that is feeling the hurt, the pain,
Correct.
challenged by the bitterness and the anger. And the other person doesn't even know that you're going through that. And so it brings me to the other question, Corinne. Should there be, or is there a certain amount of time that forgiveness should take? And then how can we tell if we're forgiving someone?
Well, everyone is an individual. Everyone is unique. And to be perfectly honest, until we make that choice to forgive, okay, the amount of time that went on before it is going to vary. So there isn't any time. It's whenever that choice happens to be made, and then we become obedient to what God wants us to do. So that would be my time frame. In terms of knowing whether or not we've forgiven somebody, I look at it this way. Like I had mentioned with the cutting my chin, okay, there isn't the pain involved. I think that's an easy clue to say the forgiveness was as deep as the wound. And that is very crucial. The forgiveness has to be as deep as the wound, especially if it was a repeated offense. If it was done on more than one occasion, you may have to do different scenarios in which that occurred. Now, that doesn't mean that you haven't forgiven them. It may not have touched all the way to the depth of the pain that was there because of the repeated exposure.
You know, thank you so much for that. But I also remember, I'm trying to remember if it's somewhere in Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, that Jesus said in one of the versions, he said, forgive quickly. And so that quickly has to be dependent on the person. The quicker you forgive, the better it is for you, in other words.
Correct.
But your quickly could take 5 years. And the other
depends how long you want to hang on to it.
Exactly. The other person quickly could be a month. But we have to hold on to that scripture that says we should forgive quickly. Because people deal with things differently. And so we have to try to forgive as quickly as possible. Correct.
The word tells us not to go to bed angry. Anger is just another form, sometimes of bitterness or anger or resentment. And we may need to forgive that person. Well, if we're told not to go to bed with it, That sounds like it's pretty quick.
So this is a personal one. Have you ever had to forgive yourself?
Oh, how many times a day do you want me to count? Yes, I do find that I have to forgive myself. For example, all right, if I hang on to that resentment and I know I need to let go of it, do I need to forgive myself? Yeah. Okay. Do I need to forgive myself for judgments or my own sins? Yes. If I can, the word says that if I confess my faults, my sins to God, he is faithful and judged to forgive me and to cleanse me from all unrighteousness. 1 John 1:9. Okay. But do I hang on to it? Do I not forgive myself? Do I not let go of it? God said he forgave me. Am I willing to forgive me?
Hmm. He forgave me. Am I willing to forgive me? Hmm.
So I have
That
to receive his forgiveness as well as extend it to myself and not hold myself in judgment.
sometimes we can be very hard on ourselves too.
I can.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes we can be very hard on ourselves because sometimes we want to be perfect in everything. We want to consider ourselves above certain things, and so we hold on this heavy rain onto ourselves. But yes, it is very important, as you're saying, that we forgive ourselves because God has forgiven us. Why are we holding ourselves hostage when God has already released us?
You said it, girl.
Wow. We are in this room tonight and we are talking about the power of forgiveness, and we are learning and we are growing through this because all of us at some point in our lives have harbored unforgiveness, whether of ourselves or for others. But as we are growing and learning, we realize that we have to release it and let it go. And Corinne, I talk about forgive ourselves just now, but is there a need to forgive someone who is deceased? The person died and you didn't get to ask for forgiveness or have some kind of talk. How do you answer that?
We don't forgive for the other people. Our forgiveness is for ourselves. It's so that we can be free. It's so that we can experience joy. It's so that we don't hang on to the things that are eating away at us. So whether they're alive or whether they're deceased really doesn't have any bearing on it. It's setting us free. And so that's the important thing. Is it going to impact them? No, but it impacts us. And so deceased or alive, I don't think makes any difference.
It comes down to the broader topic of forgiving.
And the person doesn't need to ask for forgiveness. As I said, it's between me and God. So if God tells me to do it, I think I want to obey him.
Yeah. Let's talk about, because earlier you mentioned repeat offenders.
Mhm.
And let's talk about this a little bit more, because this is one of the things that causes a lot of relationship challenges.
Correct.
And the person will say, I am not going to forgive you because you're going to do it again. If I forgive you, then I'm allowing you to do it again. I'm allowing you to come back and do it at another time. So how do we reconcile that when you hear someone say, I am not going to forgive you because you will do it again, or they might put it in this way, do I forgive you if it's likely that you will hurt me again?
Well, let me put it this way, Dr. Janice. If the offense has to do with physical harm, okay, then we definitely move ourselves out of that environment, out of that situation. We do not remain in that type of situation. Okay. If you're getting physical abuse or things like that, we remove ourselves from that. Okay. And there may be times where an individual, we may need to relationally remove ourselves. But the forgiveness part is on us. Okay. So we can have that space and that distance, but the forgiveness still lands square on our shoulders, not on the other person. And bottom line, what did Peter say to Jesus? Hey, how often do I have to forgive this dude? 10 times, God? What did Jesus say? No, Peter, 100 times. And so, and we have never experienced that degree for the most part. Maybe some people have, I do not know. Okay. But God's saying it is not limited to how often we may need to have to forgive. But to protect ourselves mentally, physically, emotionally, there may need to be some distance. And that's doing nothing but setting up boundaries. And boundaries are a totally different ballgame than forgiveness.
I like that Peter example, because that Peter example was, he actually did also mention in a day. And it's almost impossible for you to forgive. I mean, somebody to err you so many times in a day for you to forgive. So
10 times 10.
the analogy was, do it as often as possible. As often as possible, even though it doesn't look real for someone to hurt you, or any number of person to hurt you so many times in a day. But do it as often as possible. You talk about boundaries. We're coming down to a few more questions, and then we're going to open the floor so that we
I'm
can talk a
surprised
little.
nobody has put any questions in the chat. Maybe they're waiting until the floor's
I'm
open.
sure they're holding on to them for for the end. But you talk about boundaries, and let's dig a little deeper. What if the person doesn't ask for forgiveness? You have moved the boundary, you have hurt that person. And what if there is no asking?
Does God say they need to ask? I didn't read that anywhere in scripture. The only thing he told me was that for me to forgive, he didn't say the other person had to ask. Did my dad ever even acknowledge that he had molested me? No. Even to his dying day, he never did. Did I forgive him? Oh, yeah. Because I needed to. They may not recognize it or know it. And if the person is deceased, again, they wouldn't be able to ask for forgiveness.
But Corinne, sometimes the person is right in your face, and they know that, and they have not said, please forgive me.
Of course. But does that change our responsibility?
Should it be a matter where you go to the person and say, you have not even asked me to forgive you? And I know the answer, but I'm just thinking about it. Sometimes it's right in your face, and you could say to the person, you pass me every day, and you not even ask me to forgive you. You did this.
Do they know it? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Maybe it's intentional. Maybe it's not. Maybe they don't know a certain word has a trigger for you. Let's say they call you a name and they do that name all the time and you ask them not to, yet they continue to do it. Okay. But it's a trigger for us sometimes. And so we take offense. They don't mean anything by it, but that word brings a trigger to us that caused pain in the past. And so sometimes it's just being honest with an individual. Sometimes it's saying, I find that hurtful, and I don't know that you're aware of it. See, it's not necessarily throwing blame, because that isn't what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is letting go of our resentment and our anger and our hurt and our desire for revenge.
You better say that again. Forgiveness is letting go of our anger, our bitterness, our hurt, and having that desire for revenge. I'm going to ask the last question because I do believe it's time to open the floor and take some questions, because I believe that there are some questions that we need to answer that persons may have. How does unforgiveness affect our health? Physical, mental, all of it, all of our health.
You had mentioned drinking poison and expecting it to affect the other person. I think that's what unforgiveness does. It affects us in our physical, our ability to sleep. It affects us in our relationships. I don't think there's any part of unforgiveness that doesn't impact us. Physical, emotional, we'll make snap decisions or all kinds of things.
And we are not medical persons, but I would also want to believe that a lot of even the physical illnesses like stress and anger and all of those things that develop into deeper illnesses may be causes of coming from the place of unforgiveness.
And that has been proved medically.